Hey there guys, and welcome back to this, the second of 4 of our online workshops that we're going to be running this week. I asked a number of days ago in the Transform Your Running 30-day challenge Facebook group for you guys to vote on a number of different topics for me to cover this week. So I picked the top 4, and yesterday we focused on sitting and the effect that prolonged sitting has on our bodies. So lots of time spent behind a desk, behind the wheel, etc, etc. And to be honest, 21st century lifestyle full stop, we all sit too much. It's bad for us in terms of the imbalances it creates around certain key joints like the hips and the shoulders. And of course that has a real negative impact on how we run. I went through a number of exercises, number of workouts that you can use and actually package them up as a free download beneath the video so that you can literally get out and try that straight away today, that you can use to essentially begin to mitigate the effects that sitting has and help you improve your running over time into 2017. So if you haven't seen that yet, pause this, go and have a look at yesterday's video. Okay, and then come back, because this isn't going anywhere. This is going to be available for you all week, and you can then pick up where we left off. And today we're going to be talking about those glutes, those butt muscles. Okay, and this is a real hot topic. This is something that I know a lot of runners have been spoken to about by their physios, and a lot of the time it's the kind of message we get from the kind of the sports medicine world. And of course, me standing here with my hat on, where I've kind of got one hand in the runner's world, one hand in the sports medicine world. It's a conversation I'm having with people all the time, finding that they've been told by their physios that, okay, whether it's with the frame of the fact that they're suffering with patellofemoral pain or ITB syndrome or plantar fasciitis or shin splints, or you name a common running overuse injury, a lot of the time, one of the causative factors, not always the out and out causative factor, but one of the kind of bigger picture factors is that their glutes aren't working effectively. They're not stabilizing the hip well, they're not stabilizing the pelvis well, they're not doing a great job in terms of allowing the body to create the propulsion that we want to as well. Because let's not forget, those glutes aren't just stabilizing muscles, they're also, particularly glute max, a big hip extender, a big muscle to actually start creating that drive and that push that we want as a runner. We're going to get in a little bit later into the more technicalities of why it's important for us to use our glutes and what sometimes goes wrong. But I want you guys to be aware, much like yesterday where we had the free download that you could pick up and try the workouts, we've got exactly the same today. I've got a little download for you guys that beneath the video here, you can actually click the button, download a set of glute exercises to actually work along using the principles that we're going to be talking about today. So I particularly today want to pick on 3 misconceptions when it comes to glute retraining. So to start with, we spoke about yesterday the fact that when we do sit for prolonged periods of time, so like I said, sat behind a desk for ages, every day, sat behind the wheel for ages, perhaps we're a driver of some sorts work-wise, or we just happen to do a lot of long stints behind the wheel. One way or another, a lot of us end up sitting down a lot of the time. We get into this position when we get a little bit kind of short and tight around those hip flexors and quads, and a little bit weak, and a lot of the time kind of inhibited through those glute muscles. So this actually follows on really well from yesterday's video. The question is, what do we do? Having been given the message from the physio or whoever that your glutes aren't firing effectively and you need to strengthen your glutes and work on activating your glutes, how do we go about that? There are 3 misconceptions that I want you guys to understand, because it's really going to affect your ability to actually have a successful outcome in terms of trying to retrain your glutes. I see a lot of runners who tell me that they've done diligently, they've done all their glute work, they're doing all these exercises that they've been given, and they're kind of not feeling like they're getting anywhere. A lot of the time there's good reason for that. Okay, so let's have a look at the first of these misconceptions. And this can actually be looked at from 2 different angles. So you've got kind of almost 2 different types of exercise. You've got a glute exercise, which could be something like a prone lying, so lying on your front straight leg raise, or we've got an exercise like a glute bridge or something like that. Very much a floor-based exercise. The sort of exercise that perhaps wouldn't be out of place in a Pilates type class. Got the non-weight bearing aspects to it, and the fairly isolated aspects to those kind of exercises. We're really picking on those glute muscles in a non-weight bearing position to try and isolate them and feel them working. Okay, that's one side of the type of training we talk about. The other side is more functional training, where if we're dealing with a runner, we want to get a runner up into a position not unlike running. So obviously we need weight bearing and single leg weight bearing, and we need to find ways of getting those glutes to switch on in that context and actually teach the muscle how to engage in that upright position. Now, there's a big movement where people really want to go heavily after the functional training side of things, and they want all their exercises, they must be functional. And I've been really swept up in that over the years, and really, kind of looking at every exercise and saying, yeah, but is that how the body actually moves when I'm running? And there's definite place for that. But I think with that whole movement, kind of thrown the baby out with the bathwater a little bit in terms of the benefits that can be had from some of the more mat-based, ground-based, floor-based exercises. Those exercises, your more isolated exercises, non-weight bearing exercises, like, as I said, a straight leg raise and a glute bridge, those sorts of exercises are fantastic. A clam exercise, for example, fantastic for actually teaching a runner who struggles to consciously engage their glutes. So when we take things away from the subconscious and actually try and focus on engaging their glutes, a lot of runners do struggle to make that happen consciously. Brilliant exercises for actually helping them feel what it is to switch on those butt muscles and actually feel them consciously have the control of clenching their butt muscles, clenching their glutes, switching them on, engaging them, which has to be an underpinning kind of prerequisite to them being able to use their glutes as they're walking, as they're running, or let's say even taking steps back from that as they're in an upright, weight-bearing, running and walking like single leg posture, which is when we start getting into things like hip hitches and single leg squats and exercises like that. If we don't do, in many cases for many runners, the preparatory work, the work where if I've got a runner who can't feel that they're consciously able to engage their glutes, throwing them straight into a single leg squat probably isn't going to have a great outcome. They're probably not going to use their glutes all of a sudden in a single leg squat. They're probably going to use more so their quads and their calves to essentially, firstly, most likely kind of work with the strength they already have. Okay, so we've got a runner who habitually is fairly inhibited through their glutes and fairly weak through their glutes. They're probably, through compensation, they've built up over time a disproportionate strength through their quads. So if we throw them into a movement where there is an opportunity for them to bias a single leg squat with their quads, they're probably going to do so. So what we do, rather than throw the runner straight into that position, we get them into a position where we actually isolate and we break the exercise down so they can't compensate as effectively. We get them concentrating on the actual specific movements and the specific kind of making them kind of draw that connection between consciously squeezing their butt and feeling the muscle move, feeling the movement that's created by the contraction of those butt muscles. Get them really good at that. Get them really consciously capable of switching on the right muscles at the right time. And then once they build that awareness, that kinesthetic kind of proprioceptive awareness of being able to switch on their glutes at will, which for some runners takes a little bit of practice, that's when we can get them up into a position where they're weight bearing and go more after the functional work. If you throw a runner straight into the functional work in some cases, and this isn't in every case, okay, but in some cases, then they're going to get more than likely into a position where they'll play to their initial strengths. They'll play to the fact that their quads have been doing the lion's share of the work for so long. So they'll do a single leg squat in a very quaddy fashion, knee coming forwards over the toe, not particularly sitting back into the hip flexion we want to see from a single leg squat. If we're making it a glutey single leg squat, there's obviously time and place where we want to make it a little bit more quad biased. But what I'm trying to say with this is there needs to be progression. There needs to be progression from a place where we get really good at isolating the muscle and getting consciously able to engage the right muscle at the right time, and then we move it into the more functional setup rather than just jumping straight into the functional side of things. Of course, we also need to make sure that whilst we do start out with the more isolated work, the ground-based work, that we don't just stop there. Okay, because again, to flip that coin, I've seen plenty of runners who they'll tell me they've been doing all the glute work, and it's coming out of their ears, and it's something that they've really felt progress with. And to begin with, they were the runner who they weren't able to actually engage their glutes consciously, and with a bit of practice, they felt kind of flickers of life back there, and all of a sudden they can say, yes, I'm able to switch them on in this, let's say, clamshell type movement, or in this straight leg raise, or in this glute bridge. But then they don't feel the benefit when they're running. They don't find that actually it's having any effect on any positive effect on their rehab. They're still finding that when they get a certain amount of mileage into their long run, they're still suffering with what feels like tightness up around the hip and down into the feeling like it's coming down into the ITB, and perhaps a little bit of sort of lateral knee pain. They're not feeling the benefits of all this glute work. What we want is runners who start out doing this floor-based work and then quickly progress, once they're capable, progress into the weight-bearing work. So we teach the body. So think of it like this. We've taught the body to begin with how to switch the muscle on, and then we need to give the body and the muscle context. We need to teach the body the movement it needs to then be able to control. So we put them on one leg, okay, and we show them almost running-like movements. So first day challenge-wise, you guys quite early on were doing kind of running man type movements, standing on one leg. Those sorts of things, even prior to doing a single leg squat, or even doing your single leg stiff leg deadlift, for example, in the first day challenge, those sorts of movements are the movements we build up to once we've got the conscious ability to switch those glutes on. And we're then, through those movements, actually teaching the body how to use those glutes to control the hip and pelvis through functional movement, through weight bearing. Okay, because that's what it's going to be doing when we actually get you walking, get you running, and throwing some decent mileage at you. Okay, the second of these misconceptions, and again it's another big one, is that it's not just about strengthening, and it's not just about doing exercises for those butt muscles. Because a lot of the time when we get runners who struggle to engage their glutes, it's not just that they're weak in comparison to the other muscles. It may be that over time, through essentially a lack of use, they've become weak, but weakness might not be the underlying problem. It might actually be that neurologically, through a phenomenon called reciprocal inhibition, you get into a position where if you've got quite tight hip flexors, the tightness and the kind of way in which those hip flexors are really kind of amped up and really switched on and really engaged all the time, those muscles, the neuromuscular connections there are so on that it actually affects the ability for the opposite muscles, so those glutes, the antagonists to those hip flexors, to be able to receive the muscles from the brain, to be able to kick in at the right time. So they become neurologically inhibited. We need to obviously do something about that, because you could be doing all the glute exercises in the world. So, starting out with the floor-based work I was talking about earlier, doing your if we're talking about glute max, you could be doing your straight leg raises, you could be doing your glute bridges. But or your glute bridge variations, again, there's a good variation I'll put in the PDF document that will come with this video. But if you're in a position where the tightness for your hip flexors is so significant that it actually stops you being able to make the most of that glute activation, you're going to be pretty limited in terms of the progress you're going to make. So this is where it sits hand in hand with yesterday's video. We need you to be able to switch on those glutes to be able to strengthen them. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get anywhere. So we also need you to do lots of hip mobility work. Okay, and it's usually anterior hip, so at the front of the hip. So those hip flexors in particular need a little bit of attention. So alongside the glute work, usually whenever I give people glute work, I also give them mobility work. So they've got the range of motion, we're calming down the muscles that might be inhibiting those glutes, so we stand a bit of a chance of actually starting to get the signals through to those butt muscles to actually switch on when we need them. Okay, and the third and final one of these misconceptions and poorly understood aspects of glute retraining is that it's not just about the exercises. Okay, when it comes down to it, when you get back to running, if you're still running in the same old way that you used to run, especially if we're really honest about it, if you're a bit more of a kind of a shuffling runner rather than a runner who's got quite a big, long ranging stride, and you've got a tendency to keep your knees relatively low as you run, regardless of pace, then we're gonna get you into a position, if that's what you were doing beforehand and what you do after your glute work, as you get back into running, you don't really give any attention to form, you're gonna get into a position where you probably get very similar outcome to what you had the first time round. Okay, because the way in which you move largely, again, dictates which muscles you're going to engage and when. Now, there are different cues that you'll hear banded around in terms of trying to engage your glutes as you run. Some of them more or less bizarre than others. Some of them a little more crude than others, holding a biro between your butt cheeks, that kind of thing. You believe me, I've heard it, it's weird. One of the common ones I hear about is the feeling of trying to posteriorly tilt the pelvis and try and tuck your tailbone underneath you as you run. Okay, so you're running really in this awkward posteriorly rotated position, tailbone tucked back between your legs. That's gonna feel like you're clenching your butt throughout. And again, that's another cue I hear, constantly trying to clench your butt as you run. It doesn't work. It's really hard to do, and it doesn't work, it's unsustainable. A cue you can work on is just gently drawing your belly button in, because that again will help you hold your pelvis in this relative neutral position. There's always going to be movement around the pelvis as you run, but relative neutral position rather than falling into an anterior tilt. This fall forwards of the pelvis. If your pelvis is a bowl of water, tipping the water out the front of the pelvis. Gently, and I'm talking kind of 2 or 3 out of 10 effort level, gently draw that belly button in as you run. That'll help you hold your hips high and put your pelvis in a position where mechanically it's easier to switch your glutes on. But we need to think about the way in which a lot of the time, if you're holding your, as you're running, if you're running around with relatively low knees, you're going to find it very difficult to actually engage those glutes. For a lot of people, that will make very little sense, especially if you've studied any anatomy. Because of course, the height at which we're lifting those knees up, that's all about hip flexion, not hip extension. Okay, and those glutes obviously hip extensors, not hip flexors. So James, what are you talking about? Well, there's a reflex called the cross extensor reflex, which essentially, simply put, it works the 2 hips in opposition. So as I flex one hip, so as I drive one knee up forwards in front of me, using those hip flexors on, let's say, my right hand side to pull my knee up in front of me and drive it forwards, the more effective I am in driving that forwards, I'm going to get a reflex in actually going the other way with the other hip and pushing my hip back on the other side and driving off through my glutes and my hamstrings on the other side. And that's something we can really hook into. So if you know that you have been told by the physio you have a tendency not to really engage your glutes, not to really work them as you're running, and they're a little bit on the weak side, yes, you can do the strengthening work, but have a think next time you go out and run about just gently lifting your foot up a little bit more underneath you and leading forwards with the knee that little bit as you're running, lifting the knees a little bit, and I'm talking a little bit higher than you're used to. You'll probably find that you actually start pushing off a little bit harder as well, a little bit more effectively. It should feel like there's a bit more power in your stride, and that's you beginning to engage those big, powerful glute muscles. Okay, even if you don't feel like you have big, powerful glute muscles, those glutes that are there are big muscles in comparison to the rest of your body, and there is an aspect of power to be found there, which a lot of runners just don't tap into. So gently lifting the knee up. Of course, you can go far too high with this, and you can take this too far, and you'll just find it's exhausting. But just gently lifting the knee up, you should feel that you start to push out the back end of the stride that little bit more effectively. Of course, what's great for trying to learn to do this is hill reps. Hill reps are a fantastic way, with good form, a fantastic way of building strength in the legs in all the right places, particularly glutes and hamstrings. Of course, with bad form, it's a great way of putting more stress on the lower back and more stress on the knees. So, there's, as with all these things and as with everything running, there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. But hill reps, when you're focusing on form, are a fantastic way of building strength. Still, they are the 3 things I wanted to focus on from a glute training point of view. I've actually put a download together which go through a number of glute exercises which you can download. There's a button beneath this video. Hit that button. It's completely free, as with all these videos, and you'll be able to just go and instantly try out some of these exercises. And again, let me know how you get on. Let me know in the Facebook comments beneath here as well if you found that useful. If you've got any questions, I'm going to be doing a Facebook Live later on this week, particularly focusing on the questions that are coming up off the back of these first two videos. So let me know if you've got any questions, or just generally if you have any comments, if you're finding all this kind of content that I'm throwing out there useful. And I look forward to speaking to you soon. I'm going to put a video out tomorrow, which is going to be talking about core training. What do we define as core training for runners, and what are effective and ineffective core exercises for us runners? So keep an eye out for that one. That's going to land in your inbox tomorrow, and I will speak to you then. Bye now.